Hey, what's up, everyone? I just finished this book, Project to Product, and I noticed that there's not a lot of great summaries online. So I decided to create a pretty ghetto presentation to summarize the book and my thoughts around it. Hope you find it enjoyable. Let's dive in. So, the structure of the book is broken up into three different parts. The first part of the book, he defines the problem of what he's trying to address. And in the second part, he's defining the solution to that problem, and that solution is called the flow framework. And then lastly, he touches on how to deploy the flow framework within your organization. So, at a high level, the problem he's really getting after is that software has become a core component to the value a customer receives from a product, but organizations are structured for a time when value delivery did not require software development. So that's the core problem. And if you work in a company, especially in software development, you can really see and feel this. There's a lot of companies going through these quote unquote digital transformations, agile transformations, whatever you want to call it. And that's really what the crux of this problem is. These organizations were not structured to integrate software into their product delivery. So in part two, he defines the flow framework, which is a solution to that problem. And that is a way of defining and visualizing software development flow or software development work that is understandable by the business and IT. So a big problem he calls out is the fact that the way the business and the way the IT speak about their work is different. And this leads to lots of confusions. It often leads to the business thinking of IT as a black box where they just shovel money into this department and they don't really know what they're getting for their money. Now, finally, in part three, the big key takeaway is that disconnected value streams are a key factor in software development bottlenecks. These disconnects are amplified by the usage of different tools. Now, tool standardization can help with this problem, but there will always be a multitude of tools that a company uses in order to get their work done. So, the big thing that you need to focus on is you need to be able to map all that different work into some sort of integration model that is used to support the flow framework. Now, if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, no biggie. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, diving deeper into part one, defining the problem. He outlines three historical stages of IT and value delivery and how they relate to each other. So way back when, you can think back to the 1920s or 30s, the business didn't even use IT at all. There was no sense of IT. So there was this time where businesses did not utilize IT whatever to run their business. That slowly transitioned, call it 70s, 80s, 90s, where IT was used increasingly to enhance the productivity within the business. So we're not thinking of the customer and how IT can benefit the customer directly. It's more of like, hey, how can we set up email within a company? How can we set up Active Directory within a company just to enhance the productivity of our business? Now we see that we're entering this third stage where customer value is critically dependent on IT. The value of IT and it delivers to the customer inherently affects the bottom line of the business. That is where we're at in today's world. And like I said before, most businesses are structured around stage two, call it project orientation. And in order to stay relevant, these businesses need to structure themselves for stage three or product orientation. So that's that digital transformation that I talked about earlier is companies are going from a project orientation to more of a product orientation as it relates to software development. Now, here are the different ways of looking at the stages. So, stage two up here in the second column is the project orientation. Stage three is this product orientation. Now, you can see how these different stages relate to various aspects of running a business. So, we have budgeting, stage two, project orientation. New budget requires a new product, new project, as opposed to product orientation, funding of product value streams based on business results. So I'm not going to go in depth on each of these aspects. If you want to read more carefully, you can just pause the video and read it at your leisure. Otherwise, yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Moving on to part two, defining the solution. So, like I said, the solution he proposes to helping transition from stage two to stage three is the flow framework. And that, like I said, is defining a way of defining and visualizing software development work that is understandable by the business and IT. Now, there are three critical parts to that flow framework. One is defining flow items. Two are wrapping metrics around those flow items. And we have two sets of metrics. We have flow metrics and we have business metrics. And then three is creating a value stream dashboard for your value streams. Now, this first critical part of the flow framework, flow items. The definition of flow item is a unit of business value pulled by a stakeholder through a product's value stream. Now, what's great about the flow framework is that there are four main flow items. Here are the four flow items. We have features, defects, risks, and debts. And you can see through the different columns here what each of the features, what they deliver, who they're pulled by, a quick description, and maybe an example artifact of each of those flow items. What's also interesting about the flow framework is that all work done by a software development team will map to one and only one flow item. So if a software development team is working on a user story or feature or whatever, that can only map to a feature or a defect or a risk or debt. It can't map to a feature and a defect at the same time. Now, what this does is it forces high-level IT people and the business to have those rich trade-off discussions instead of pretending that we can work on features and defects at the same time. We force the business to choose whether they want to work more on features or on defects. And that helps focus the business and helps align the work of the software development teams to the strategic goals of the business. So it's a very important very important point in this is that these items only work and go into one of these items at a time. Now, I talked about another critical element of the flow framework, and that are metrics. And here are the flow metrics for the flow framework. I think flow velocity, flow time, flow load, and flow efficiency are all pretty similar to some lean concepts that I'm sure you've seen before. So probably won't go too in depth into that. Like I said, you can pause the video and read more of the descriptions and examples. But I do think it's a little interesting to look at flow distribution in depth. And that really is just the allocation of flow items in a particular state across a measure of time. So, for example, it's how many bugs versus features versus debt did the team work on in a sprint, for example, or how many, you know, risks did we resolve versus debts versus features within a release. So that flow distribution describes how much work the team is doing across all these different flow items, and that really gives you a sense of where the business is kind of quote unquote spending their time and effort and investments on. Like what area of focus are they looking at? So I think that metric is good to call out in depth, and we'll see an example of what that looks like pretty close. Next up are business metrics. These are pretty generic. So we have value, cost, quality, and happiness. The big thing to call out is that these are just generic things that the flow framework requires the business to define. How they define that is up to them, but they suggest that the business do define these type of metrics to look at for each value stream. And now the idea is to pair these previous metrics, the flow metrics, pair them with these business metrics to get that good sense of, okay, here is the work of the software development team. Now, how does that relate to the business metrics of what we really care about? And so this is kind of at the crux of the flow framework is how do we further connect what the business cares about with what is going on in these IT departments. And so when you put up these business metrics in alignment with the flow framework metrics, you get a better sense of that connection. Now, lastly, here is the third critical part of the flow framework. Now, this is an example of a value stream dashboard. It doesn't describe exactly what you should do, but it just gives you an example of kind of the things that you can think about applying to your value stream. So we see right here, this is that flow distribution that I covered earlier. And you can think of, let's just say that each one of these bars is a quarter within a year time frame. So this outlines, hey, how many features, I think this blue is features, how many features versus tech debt did the team work on for this quarter? And then over time, you can see what the team worked on quarter over quarter. And this can start to give you insight into, hey, are we spending too much time working on features? Are we not spending enough time on tech debt? What is the state of the software development team, and how does that relate to some of the business objectives that we're trying to accomplish? So that can help provide a kind of like a lagging indicator, like what happened, and also a leading indicator as far as, okay, hey, it looks like we spent a lot of time on features. I bet you our tech deck is really high, and we will probably see a slowdown in our velocity over time. So that can be a leading indicator for what might happen in the future. All right, next up is part 3, deploying the flow framework. So like I said before, for each of the value streams that you define within your organization, one of the key bottlenecks is a disconnect. And these disconnects are amplified by usage of different tools. So he talked about being mindful of standardizing your tools, but also there is kind of a lower bound of the number of tools that you can reduce down to for software development, because the work that we do is so complicated that you do need specialized tools to represent the specialized processes that take place within software development. So given that there's this lower bound, we need to think about how to map all the work a software development team does into an integration model. Now, the integration model provides the support for that flow framework. And I'll show you what I mean here pretty soon. So this is kind of just a generic example of what the tool set of an organization might look like. So we just have some generic tools here, and notice that they're not connected. They're kind of all in their different silos. You can think of each one of these tools as their own database. And in this database is a collection of information that relates to the work of the software development team. And if all these different databases or tools are disconnected, what that means is this information that describes the work of the team is also disconnected. And so imagine you're a business person and you talk to a high level IT person and you're saying, hey, what's going on with the team? It's very difficult to get insight into ground truth, what is actually happening with these software development teams if all this information is siloed in all these different databases. It's hard to get that holistic picture of what is even going on. And if you can't describe what is going on, how are you going to make good business decisions in order to spend your IT resources to align with your strategic goals? So that kind of process that I described is really at the crux of the flow framework. It's really trying to address making the ground truth of these software development teams visible to the business, such that they can make much better decisions for the business. Okay, so this is kind of like the current state. It's an example of what maybe your workplace looks like. Now, what the flow framework suggests you do is start taking a look at those tools or the databases that you have that describe the core ground truth of your software development teams and start connecting them together. Now, I just made up these arrows. They might not be, correct to your context. They're not meant to be prescriptive. They're meant to be just descriptive, describing the fact that these tools need to be connected somehow. Maybe not all tools need to be connected together, but all the tools do need to map to this integration model layer that I have above. Now, this integration model really isn't fancy. It's just talking about, hey, for each of these tools that we use, the work that happens within them, it needs to map to those flow items that I described above. So if we have user stories in Jira and those user stories map to epics, okay, so remember a flow item that we described is features. So maybe epics in Jira will map to features in our integration model. Maybe we have ServiceNow tickets that our customer service people log. Okay, those tickets represent defects that our customers are logging. Okay, so maybe tickets in ServiceNow get mapped to bugs within the flow framework. So that's all the integration model is talking about, is taking the work of these tools and then mapping them to the flow items within the flow framework. Now, once you have that data in that integration model, then you can start wrapping around value stream dashboards for each of the value streams that you have. And once you have that, then you can start having those rich conversations between the business and IT. And so, really, this is kind of at a very, very high level, kind of like that rough plan of how you would deploy the flow framework. First of all, it's aligning ground truth and then mapping that ground truth to the flow framework. And then once it's in that flow framework, you're taking those metrics within that framework and then you're displaying them in a way that makes sense to you and your context. And then you can just have much better conversations. So that's really it for the book. I hope you enjoyed the summary. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.